Awesome. We're live with another episode of Subscription Radio. I'm your co-host, DJ Fish, DJ Ben Fisher.
DJ Joel Van Horn.
We finally gave him a DJ name. Very, very creative.
Very creative one, yeah.
And our special guest today is Scott Norton, who's become a good friend and advisor to us over the last like 6 months. And
you can call me MC Kensington.
MC Kensington, love it.
It's a good one.
You guys are on the ones and twos. I'm locking the flow.
Watch out, we're going to start beatboxing. And so part of what we wanted to talk about, and part of what was exciting about bringing Scott on the show, was talk a little bit about how CPG has evolved over the last 10 plus years. Scott was a co-founder of Sir Kensington's. They eventually sold to Unilever. Would love to hear sort of like an abbreviated story, Scott, of sort of that evolution of what CPG was like for you, and like maybe some of the challenges you guys came across and lessons that you'd learned, and then sort of fast forward and talk about what you're seeing today as now that you're involved in advising and investing in a bunch of D2C brands and actively involved in like a board member of Mudwater. Like, what are some of the themes and things that have changed or haven't changed from when you were running Sir Kensington's? And then there's some other topics that I know that we'll get into along the way.
Great. I love that. Well, I think just in the way that people talk about societies as being pre-modern, modern, and postmodern, I think we can look at the last 30 years of CPG as pre-internet, internet, and post-internet. I mean, obviously we're not post-internet, but we are in a fundamentally different time than we were 10 years ago. And I'll talk a little bit about what that is. 30 years ago, the biggest force in CPG was the television industrial complex. This was a time there were no such real thing as like high-growth CPG startups. I mean, maybe they were a few, but really, really few and far between, and nowhere near the Cambrian explosion that's happened now. And back then, it was preformulaic. If you were a big CPG company, right, a P&G, a Danone, a Nestle, Unilever, you had the ability to, invest a lot of money in product development, and you could kind of take your sweet time bringing things to market. You would pay about $1 million per SKU in slotting fees to be in every single major retailer in America. And you would invest a significant portion of that, maybe 15% of your expected sales, something like that, in television media, right? Broadcast media, where you could hit hundreds of millions of people. And those products, right, marketed to, generally like a middle-class customer, and it was a rinse and repeat. It was like that, essentially, like it kind of grew out of World War II, and it was consistent up until the early 90s. And I was on a panel a couple years ago, and someone asked, what's the biggest thing that's changing your industry? And this is the food industry. And I thought about that, and, of course, like you'd expect an answer like, healthier habits or sustainability or, a certain retailer's pricing model, right? The answer I came up with was the internet. Because the internet changed the way that ideas flow through our society. And now, instead of people just getting their food education from the television and from fast food advertisements, they started to get their education from social media, from peer-to-peer, from internet cookbooks, from global flavors, right, and stories. And, of course, the Food Network was an interesting kind of overlapping part of that. But now, all of a sudden, you saw the rise of these, frankly, like cultural diet trends like a keto or a paleo, right, or even plant-based movement is, of course, big here, too, that originated on the internet. One of the most infamous dishes of our generation is the avocado toast. Would we be eating avocado toast if it wasn't for Instagram?
Totally.
It really arose in popularity in like the late 2010s, early 2010s in cafes in Melbourne, Australia. Instagram influencers hit that. Now wherever you go, you're in Shoreditch, you're in Oakland, you're in Brooklyn, there's that avocado toast, and it's like a competition. How much can they charge for it? $17.
What else can they put on it?
Throw an egg on it, like throw some caviar on that. So I grew up in an era which was definitely post-TV industrial complex, right? So like Tom and Tom, the juice guys, who were like, they were gods of mine, and they were years ahead of me in college. And Seth Goldman of Honest Tea was like a Harvard Business School case study that I read. His book, by the way, is amazing. His comic book about founding Honest Tea. Justin from Justin's Nut Butters had like come up and was like breaking through that industry. And so we came up at a time where like, okay, the internet was now starting to move ideas around in food, and like we got press in the Die Line, and we got press in Cool Hunting, and all these like sweet blogs right back when there were blogs, and that was like our first source of sales and our first source of notoriety. But then commerce in 2010, 2011 online was not really, definitely not in CPG, definitely not in food. Even Amazon was kind of underpenetrated then. So for us, especially with a product, we make condiments in glass jars. They're breakable, they're heavy, they're expensive to ship, right? And they also requires a lot of discovery. And so for us, it was all about retailers, right? That was our growth model, was distribution, and starting with what I would call like the thought leadership retailers, like the badge retailers, Dean & DeLuca, Williams-Sonoma, our first two major clients. Little cheese shops here and there, and then Whole Foods, region by region, grocery stores, Target, Walmart, right? And Amazon, of course, became a big part of that as well. And so that was sort of like an older playbook, right? Now older playbook. That was the playbook that we used, which was like predominantly brick and mortar retail. You start with the places where the people walking in the door have the highest propensity to experiment. They have the highest propensity to pay a premium or to be price agnostic, highest propensity to want something that's healthier, whatever, more interesting, and then you kind of work your way down from there, right? It's a classic adoption curve. Influencers, early adopters, majority, late majority, etc. Now we're in the post-internet era, and what I would call like the post-internet commerce era, which is the default way that CPG founders or CPG companies will go to market is with a DTC offering. It's with an e-commerce offering. And, well, why is that? It's because on the internet, you get to write your own rules. That's why everybody loves the internet. So you don't have to appeal to a gatekeeper and hear yes. Shopify doesn't care. You sign up for Shopify, sell anything you want, as long as it's legal, right? You don't have to worry about all the technicalities of the middlemen, the brokers, like setting your pricing, the bill backs, all this kind of stuff. And of course, you're not geographically bound. So what's really interesting about, in that old world when people would go to market, you'd think about, okay, here's our warehouse, here's our awareness, let's start in New York City, let's work our way up from there, right? Or like Angie's Boom Chicka Pop popcorn, that started in the Minnesota Vikings stadium, right? And everybody in Minnesota like freaked out about it, and then they went through the Midwest, and then they went national. Now, and because of income inequality in America, which has been tragically rising, wealthy people in California and New York City and Miami have more in common with each other than they do in people on the outskirts of those own towns, right? So now the geographic thing kind of breaks down. And so really it's all about, okay, how do we target a demographic across the country? And we're going to ship to all those fancy zip codes, right? And I'm saying this like with this sort of tinge of like a lens of like arguably classism to it, because there is, I think, a lot of kind of cultural magnetism that the left coast liberals have in the better for you CPG space, which by the way is a huge overlooked opportunity. Like if you look at Black Rifle Coffee and other brands that don't necessarily fit that mold, it's they resonate really strongly. But I'll digress from that for a second and just say now what I come across is they can much more quickly get to, call it 10 million in revenue online only before they have to start to think about playing other people's games. Mm-hmm. Now, that's even changing a bit, though, and this will transition to other topics because now the new gatekeeper is not Whole Foods. The new gatekeeper is Meta, formerly known as Facebook. Mm. And with Whole Foods, I knew that in 2011 when I pitched them, they would take a 38% margin on my product. Today, they take a 38% margin on my product. They're always going to take that, I mean, maybe 42%, whatever, but it's in a very narrow band. Facebook, as a distribution awareness channel, they change their margin on you like that, right? So one month you might have a sustainable business and you know how much Facebook is taking of your overall pie. The next month, Facebook says, you know what? We're a price maker, you're a price taker. We're making quarterly earnings, right? On Wall Street, like clockwork. They have PhDs, fantastic data scientists. They know exactly what they need to do for price elasticity to raise prices for you to go to market and for them to make their earnings, right? So the rules of the game in this new world change a lot more quickly than the rules of the game in the old world. And what was once kind of seen as this like great democratizing factor of e-commerce has actually now become a trap if you don't play your cards right. And we can talk about what playing your cards right even means. But even this sort of transition from DTC anything goes in like the mid 2010s to where we are now, things have gotten a lot more harder for entrepreneurs across e-commerce, but in CPG especially, where the average order value is lower. I told you I was a nerd.
That's awesome.
That's a great thesis.
I guess, I mean, so what? I don't want to jump in. Joel, do you have any questions or observations from that?
I mean, there's a lot there to unpack, definitely. I think as you look at Sir Kensington's, for instance, right? How has Sir Kensington's kept up with all of that? I know you're not as involved anymore, but I'm just curious how you think they're keeping up with this shift that you're talking about, as an example, you know?
Yeah, well, in a lot of ways, we were lucky. We are lucky that we never got hooked on the Facebook Meta, IV drip, because since our product, right, like each product costs around like $5, right, for the customer. So if you try and sell that DTC online, you have to like bundle a bunch of them together, and then again, it's expensive to ship it. There's breakage, so we never had a sustainable DTC model. So we never went into DTC. And so instead, our online sales are, our biggest customers are Instacart. And Instacart's not really a customer. It's like a marketing channel that pulls from your existing retailers. Mm-hmm. But it's effectively a customer because that's where the customer swipes their credit card, right? And you can market through them and you can measure sales through them. And then the other big one for us is Amazon. And so Amazon is a super important go-to-market partner, because there is a lot of products, consumable products like CPG, that have the economics and the qualities that can work really well on Amazon, but can't quite get to that pure DTC model when it comes to like price point and all that kind of stuff. So you still have to bundle 2-packs, but you don't have to like bundle 4-packs, right? You don't have to like. And of course, with Prime shipping, it's super easy for the customer to just click the button, add it to their cart. So Sir Kensington's, in a lot of ways, I used to have a lot of FOMO, because I was like, DTC is so cool. Like, I want to come out with this spice blend, and I want to like create something where we have a direct connection to the consumer. And I still wish that we really knew who each and every one of our customers were. Like, that would be so powerful, and that's such a majestical idea. And something that's really hard for these big CPGs who all work through channels. But at the same time, too, I like having our products available in lots of stores with predictable, economics. And of course, what those stores do, right, is they create awareness for you. And not only do they create awareness, but they're also like a check mark of approval. Because when you walk into Whole Foods and you see something in Whole Foods, that carries a lot of weight, right? We went through their buying process, through their ingredient list, right? And when they merchandise it, they're kind of like Whole Foods, kind of like an art gallery in that respect, right? Where they curate the products in there versus other retailers, which might just like offer everything under the sun.
So I'm curious, how did you get to know your customers in that model, right? I quietly was joking to myself, a warranty card if your mayo is bad, like, send us your information and we'll send you a new one. Like, you see that with a lot of the, like, Amazon products where they basically they found, and I was never aware of this until getting into the industry, was like all these ways that people who go through distributors try to understand who their customer is because they don't have access to that purchase information.
Yeah. Well, I'll say that a lot of people do it way better than we do, and we're nowhere near like great at it. And and so what we did though is we created this community called the Taste Buds.
Yep. Oh, yeah. Yep.
And the Taste Buds is like sort of the Sir Kensington's fan club, and we have tens of thousands of members that basically are member of this like private forum. And we've built that list through affiliate emails, through even on the side of our package. Actually, we have like variable printing where some of our mayonnaise say one thing and some say another thing, and one of them is like it says, do you know that this mayonnaise has a secret society? And it's like a picture of like an Illuminati pyramid, and so part of that is like really it took us a long time to understand the mindset model for our customers. And our customers ultimately, like, it's someone who's a lovable weirdo and is kind of always looking for a better way and does things left of normal. And so our customer is someone that would be like, do I want a regular mayonnaise or do I want a mayonnaise that has its own secret society? Right? That's the mayonnaise that I want. So it was a lot of, we did some traditional focus groups, and we worked with some great agencies who helped us kind of put this mental model together. But it was a long journey, and we still don't have a way to really understand customers. Like, I have a bit of FOMO for companies that are able to say like, oh yeah, let's just send out an email survey to our 150,000 subscribers about what product we should make next, right? And now we can slice them and dice them by gender, by age, by geography. Like, it's really nice to have that. But yeah, we did it kind of the old-fashioned way.
And so I'm curious, did you guys do any sort of digital testing? And I don't mean through, like, you weren't selling D2C, so you weren't doing it for customer acquisition. But even the Facebook advertising and targeting obviously has been around for a while. I mean, I don't know the exact date, but let's say since 2012.
I was going to say right around
maybe.
And so I'm just curious if you guys did any sort of like landing page testing, targeting people on Facebook, trying to get a sense around taste, like and like stuff like that.
We only started doing that stuff about a year ago.
Okay.
For purchase intent. So that was never an early part of the work that we did, but it was something that we've started to do a year ago. Yeah.
Got it. Interesting.
And we were never really heavy on digital marketing because there was no attribution. Like, because we weren't funneling people to a buy box,
right.
It was really hard to like ramp up the spend because of like awareness, right?
Right.
So this is kind of a very interesting holy grail, and like I'm now looking for companies that are able to bridge this gap between the space of the retailer and basically finding really creative ways to do what you're talking about, Ben, which is like to register the product, right? Because people just have a million things to do, and like even scanning a QR code, putting an email in, like it's a lot to ask unless you're really like deep in with a brand. But I think like what's interesting about this space is that the pandemic has totally changed the way we use QR codes, right? It's more like the technology is 20 years old, but we have now reoriented, one, obviously because everyone has smartphones, but two, because the pandemic treated us, you did everything touchless. So I'm curious how those are going to evolve. And also now iPhones have NFC built into them. I'm sure Androids do too. So I'm curious like how NFC, is NFC going to get cheap enough? Because right now it's not quite cheap enough to put in a CPG product. Unless you're talking about like a really nice like, Korean skincare cream or something like that has really high SRP. But I'm very curious to where NFCs and these sort of digital physical connections will go. There's a brand called So Sake.
Yeah.
Which you know about that?
No, when you first started saying so, I thought I was thinking of a different brand, and then it went to sake, and I was like, no.
Oh, yeah. But it's like, this is a sake, it's like a sparkling sake brand that has 2 QR codes on the package, and like one of them is like you can like play a game to like help the sake can like do something. So I thought that was kind of cute, right? Like that would get someone to scan, like, oh, play this game.
That's awesome.
So I'm curious to see more people do stuff like that.
Got it. Yeah, well, I think one thing I'd love for us to talk a little bit around is we'll call it the subscription, and sort of like that within like D2C and CPG specifically, and what, I mean, maybe even starting off with like, do you have any subscriptions yourself? Because I think part of what we're even talking about is we've talked a lot about OG and what's happening today with D2C, and then some of the threats and challenges around, sounds like, variable cost. You don't know how much it's going to cost to acquire a customer, in the same way that, you know, there was predictable cost or margins around getting into Whole Foods. You know, what are some of the creative experiences or some of the like great experiences you've had with brands today, like modern brands, that have stood out to you? And what was it about them?
Yeah. Great question, and this is where I feel like I'm probably one of the lamest subscription radio guests that you'd have, because unlike you guys, I'm not subscription junkies, and it's not something I've naturally gravitated towards, with a couple of exceptions. So we do subscribe to Mud, and full disclosure, I not only am I personally obsessed with Mud, but I also am an investor and I'm on the board. So I'm a daily drinker of Mud, and I love Mud. And I subscribe to the Rise and the Creamer. Mm-hmm. And then we also subscribe to Quip toothbrushes, because both of our kids use Quip toothbrushes. Mm-hmm. And these, I think, are two important examples, not because the subscription experience in and of themselves is like mind-blowing, but because it points to, I think, an interesting divide in CPG and in a strategic differentiation around subscription that not maybe a lot of people really understand. And that's that, in life, there are habits and rituals that we engage in every day, and kind of the definition of a habit is a behavior that you don't use any brain cells to do, right? That you don't decide to do. And then there are different ad hoc actions that fill our lives, right? What am I going to do today? What am I going to eat for dinner? Like all these things we actually have to expend mental energy doing. And what I've found is that, in terms of getting involved with businesses, investing, or even creating products, is occasion is a really, really crucial element to the success of a consumable product, right? And so there's a reason why Corona uses this image of the beach, right? Because what they're saying is not only when you're on vacation, but anytime you want to feel like you're on vacation, that's the occasion for a Corona, right? Mm-hmm. And there's I think, beer does this often by using the kind of like after work or like certainly football, right? Like they group themselves around these occasions. And I think like what we found with Sir Kensington's mayonnaise, for instance, which is a far, far bigger business than our ketchup, was that there was a lot more occasion around mayonnaise because people would make sandwiches on a daily basis, whether it's like for their kids' lunches or for their own lunches. And so when you get in that like sandwich routine, all of a sudden it's magic. What Quip is, right? Brushing your teeth is like the definition of something you don't expend brain power doing because it's part of your morning routine. And of course with Mud, either in drinking instead of coffee or supplementing coffee, it's right there, right? So I think that you've got to have both a ritual behavior that's already in a customer's life, and if you can create that ritual behavior, then that's magic, but like good luck, because habits are really hard to break and their habits are really hard to create. And you need a sufficiently differentiated product. Like, I'm not really interested in subscription coffee companies because, yeah, it's an amazing ritual, but you can just sort of swap them in, right? And like, it's very hard for customers to differentiate between different roasts of coffee. It's just, there's not a big moat there in terms of product. So I would say, for any founder, any early stage entrepreneur, or even later stages developing products, think a lot about the customer's world, right, as a clock with different day parts. The morning they get up, whatever, 7 a.m., they go to bed, 10 p.m. What are the different elements of their life, and where are their occasions and where are their rituals there? That's what you're sort of plugging into, right? That's the canvas that you have to paint on as a CPG brand. It also points to the fact that one of the challenges, right, for subscription offerings in CPG and in consumables, in food especially, is that it's really hard for customers to estimate their usage. Mm-hmm. So you go to that subscribe and save page, and you're like, well, yeah, like, chia. I have chia in this smoothie. I make chia smoothies often. I buy the same SKU every time. I know I'm going to be right back there buying chia, right? But I don't know, am I going to make 10 smoothies this month? Am I going to make 50 smoothies this month? And then when I make a smoothie, do I put in a tablespoon? Do I put in 2 tablespoons? Well, this package is labeled a net weight. How many tablespoons are in a net weight ounce? Okay, this is too complicated for me. Just let me buy it once, right? So there's, I think, there's probably an opportunity in software around usage estimation, or around even historical, oh, you've bought this product 3 times and you do it at this frequency. We know how frequently you do it. Do you want to subscribe to it? Stuff like that could be interesting. I don't know if incrementally the juice is worth the squeeze, but that's definitely one of the challenges why the software that Rodeo creates could be utilized by everyone, but is it really that useful if ultimately people have a hard time predicting their usage?
I think you're also describing identifying who uses the product as a ritual versus who's kind of just using it casually here and there, doesn't really use it regularly, right? So figuring out who they are to target them with either different education, trying to change their behavior, working harder with one versus the other, or deciding they're not your customer.
Yes.
That process, right?
Yeah. And that, Joel, I think, you touched on an interest in customer centricity, Ben. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, what you're talking about, Joel, you can answer that question with data, but there are not a lot of great out-of-the-box tools, and if there are, listeners, please write us, to really understand and segment those customer behavior, purchase frequency. Are they buying the same SKU every time? Are they buying different SKUs every time? I think there's a lot of richness there that frankly, brands either don't have the capacity or don't have the tools to understand.
Do you think it's possible to get people to have a ritual with your product, or do they have to have it ahead of time?
Well, like I said, I think it's really hard to build ritual if it isn't there yet. I always think about how do you basically the easy path is taking existing behaviors and making a small swap, tweak, and the difficult path is actually creating new behaviors.
Totally.
Trying to think of a good example here.
I mean, you could look at energy.
Well, tell me. What do you mean by energy?
Well, what I'm thinking about is even COVID's another great example, but even what's happening, unfortunately, around oil, right? Mm-hmm. In Russia and Ukraine, we've been talking about energy and climate change, and not to get into the sort of various we'll call it aspects of all of that, but once, especially when you have a large organization, which I'll refer to like a country as, that's using a certain, is reliant upon a certain product, it's very difficult to change that behavior, especially when there's no single decision maker. It's not a matter of what you end up doing is that's, I guess, where politics come in, and you end up having to try to create movements or of people around behavioral change. And I think what's interesting, even thinking about the work from home, I'll call it the work from home movement. Some of us have been working from home or working remotely for 10 plus years. It took the pandemic for large companies who historically were always you were going to be here 5 days a week, and now they had to drastically change a behavior. They were forced to change a habit. Because I know that James Clear, not just James Clear, but a number of authors have talked about, like, basically takes 28 days to establish a habit, a new habit.
Yeah.
It's interesting because also there's a difference between a habit and an addiction, right? And maybe fossil fuels or whatever, energy is not an addiction, but maybe fossil fuels might be an addiction.
Switching costs too.
Switching costs. Yeah, no, I think it's...
Yeah. I thought of an example, another one.
Okay.
I mean, I think we have a lot of habits and ingrained behaviors around oil and automobiles. Another company I'm actually involved in is a electric vehicle education company. So their mission is to get more people in electric cars. And there is not only switching costs economically, but also like mentally, right? It's like trying to interpret all the different, like, do I need swappable batteries? Like, where do I fill this thing up with, like, energy? How many amps do I need? Like, is the technology going to change? But I think a good example of a company that actually has changed behavior is Peloton. And I don't think that all these Peloton customers, subscribers, had exercise bikes at home before, right? They probably had gym memberships. They probably had other routines. But probably, like, stadium cycling was only one share of their workout pie. And now Peloton has probably become like 3/4 of their workout pie. So Peloton is, I think, a great example of someone that has done what's really hard to do and actually shape people's behaviors. Part of that psychologically is about the fact that it comes with a big upfront investment, right? So if you buy one of these, like, expensive, nice looking bikes, then you're like, I want to get the worth out of this thing, right? And so that builds that 28-day habit. And then once you're like, okay, well, I'm using it, I've used it, and then you're in the zone. They've done a really good job at that. I respect the hell out of Peloton. Yeah, I think it's amazing. It's tough to be a public company, but I think really impressive what they've done.
We'll have to see if it lasts past the pandemic, right?
Yeah. We're rooting for him.
Well, I've been thinking, to your point, Scott, earlier around replenishment. So, like, I'm a bit of a subscription nerd. I think I've mentioned this on the show before, where I more or less for about like 7 years, like, outsourced the personal aspects of my life, where everything was a subscription or run by my EA, so I could focus on business. Like, I use a food delivery service that effectively. They take input from me, like my weight and stuff. They know how often I'm working out. They're basically using Grubhub's API to use stores that publish, like, the calories of a meal, and then they're looking at the contents of the meal. Like, is it high?
What company is this?
It's called Clockwork Nutrition.
Wow.
And so I've been using them for about 2 years, and it enabled me to I lost like about 30 pounds leading up to my wedding in September. And what was really interesting about it was, and I've always been a creature of habit where I'll eat the same meal every single day for both meals. Like, I'll have a different thing for lunch every day. Well, the same thing for lunch, the same thing for dinner. And then that also enabled me to, like, tweak it. And then, I was able to see those.
I read one of your blog posts about this. Yeah. And I was like, you and I are not the same.
Yeah.
I think we have a lot in common, but our dietary tastes and choices are very different.
Yeah. No, I guess I was
like, the idea of eating the same thing for lunch and dinner for me is like that's dragged me through hell. Like, I like to spice things up.
You're not alone. It's resulted in a lot of. Yeah, it was like one of those things where I'd even, like, start saying on our first date.
You're just so you know, I'm really weird with food.
We'll go out on a cheat day.
Sustenance, that's all it is.
But what's cool about Clockwork, and also one of the things that drives me crazy, and I mentioned Clockwork because it's food delivery, is, I travel, or now, Joel and I are in beta works a few times a week, or my wife had surprised me, and Joel and my wife surprised me with a trip upstate over the weekend, and I had to give like a 2.5 day advance notification to the food delivery service to let them know that I'd be out of town.
2.5 days. Wow.
2.5 days, because they basically batch all of your meals, and that's how, for whatever reason, it makes it what it ultimately has resulted in is a ton of waste. I end up having to throw at least 2 of my meals a week, and I can't even cancel the meals.
Do you know how to cook? Do you know how to cook?
Debatable.
You should learn, man. You would love it.
You might learn one meal.
I hired a cook. What I used to do. Well, I've tried cooking. I won't even go as far as that. Basically, what I did do is I would batch meals for the entire week, and I'd have the same thing for the entire week. But again, I outsourced it. So I had some basically cook in a crock pot, like the meals that I wanted.
Or you should try Mosaic. Have you tried Mosaic?
Yeah, my wife's a subscriber.
Okay, great.
So after you introduced me to them, we subscribed.
Love that. Because frozen is a way to solve that, right? Like, Blue Apron is tough because things really only last that long in the refrigerator, right? And if you can pull things directly out of the freezer, I mean, that's more like what they do in Europe. Like, it's a very European model. And I'm kind of a Europhile. Like, they do everything a little bit better in Europe, except for rodeos. But yeah, I like Mosaic.
No, but that's a good point. Like, yeah, so basically that would be like an example, effectively, of a shelf-stable food, because of temperature.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
like with Clockwork, what's great about it though is it's convenient because I don't have to think about it, and for me, it's eliminating. I used to wear the same clothes every day. I have like 10 of the same shirts. A lot of my own personal rituals have been around eliminating the complexity, so I can around basically the day-to-day complexity. Like, I don't want to be making the same decisions around food every single day, because it just, to me, that's for whatever reason, I think it's unique to me slightly. Is like it's just exhausting.
Sure.
And so, but with Clockwork, yeah, like the big thing is like I don't know 2 days in advance if I'm going to be in town or not, or if a dinner comes up. I generally don't know until that day. And so what's interesting is for them, it's a problem on the technology side. And I'm on the verge of canceling because it's gotten to the point of like, I just feel like I'm wasting so much food. And so I've ended up just having them give it to people on the street if I'm not home. But it's like extremely frustrating. And it's an example of where a subscription in my mind breaks down.
Yeah, totally.
And it's this lack of flexibility around, like, I almost would be better off. Like, I know I want my shawarma from Naya every day. And so basically what I almost want to do is just click a button when I'm at my office, and it goes to my office, or I click a button. Unfortunately, then I would have to set a reminder, but then I could have, like, effectively have a link in the button or in my reminder to click it to ship it. But, like, having more control over that, I think especially as people are more and more nomadic, and we live in New York City, and so, like, my day-to-day, I can't speak for you, but, like, by and large, especially now that the pandemic's opening up, like, I'm going places, I might be going on meetings, and it needs to be flexible.
Yeah.
And I don't know, that's just been like I don't have a whole lot of pain around subscriptions, because worst case scenario, I'll often have like a bit too much. But around food, especially food that expires, like, it's gotten to the point where it's...
Sounds like you need to make a change.
And, yeah, we've told them.
So I think another element of subscriptions is worth touching on too is the idea of belonging and enrollment, right? Because it's one thing to be like, I'm an occasional customer of something, but when you're a subscriber to something, you're a member. Like in a lot of nomenclatures, right? A lot of brands will call their subscribers members. When I was thinking about what subscriptions I do have, like, I subscribe to the Economist digital edition. I used to subscribe to the physical edition, but they would just stack up because I would never read them. I subscribe to, like, the Financial Times Weekend Edition and the Wall Street Journal. And Mud, obviously, we talked about. But, like, I read an Economist article, like, once a quarter because it's no longer pushed to me and it's not busy. But never in a million years am I going to give up that subscription, because in my own mind, I'm an Economist subscriber, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm an intelligent, global, engaged, curious person that is like my identity is linked to this product, right? It's linked to this voice. that is something that I think also is probably way underutilized by CPG companies broadly, is the fact that like you need to, and generally like this internet marketing world of growth marketing, quote unquote, has neglected the badge value of a lot of these brands, and that's why you see now like all these brands doing like single-digit millions in revenue, and maybe they're economically sustainable, maybe they're not, but like where are they going to go and who's going to pick them up? Because like the big acquirers, like a lot of like the nuts and bolts of the business, they don't actually really care about, but what they do want is that you have a distinct cultural voice that inspires enrollment in people, right? And to stand for something, and to have this tribe, for lack of a better word, and so that I think is also something that brands could really do a lot more of, is recognize that like when people are subscribers, they're members, and they should be thought of as like card-carrying members. That there's like community there, reciprocity, like and treat those people really well. So I think there's like a lot of fertile territory there, especially as retention becomes higher on people's priority lists, about what can we do for our members to make them feel like they're part of a community that they're proud to be a part of, and to also see regular benefits there.
That's really interesting. I'm curious, you're talking about wanting to be affiliated with the brand. Do you express your affiliation with people you know publicly in other ways, or is it more that feeling
besides
you
on
get?
podcasts?
Right, exactly. Besides here, or is it more just for yourself to kind of, you have some sort of connection there?
It's mostly myself, but I do like to be like that guy who like read an article in one of these fancy newspapers and emails it to people.
Referencing an article.
Yeah, be like, oh, I know you're interested in this thing, right? And it's like, oh, like Scott shares my interests, and he's sending me this thing, and it's it's not like some random thing from USA Today that like your boomer mom forwarded you, right? It's like a intelligently written piece. So I would say that's I definitely am like I'm always like I love showing it off. I mean, the other day I texted someone.
You're describing that you're reading high-quality content, this example.
Yeah.
You're referencing it to share the knowledge.
Texted someone like an article from the FT, and I think there's a little bit of me that's like, this is cool, and this is who I am.
Yeah.
What's interesting is, obviously certain products I think are better suited. Like, I'm just imagining like an Advil community or Tylenol, right? Like, my assumption
those
is
low
those
emotional engagement products, right?
Right. And no, but so I've been thinking about like just certain types of products where maybe you don't want to engage with the product, maybe you do, and there's also like taboo products, right? Like, right or wrong, are you going to join your Condom Club? I don't know. Like,
no, I think that's super interesting, and I bet you good brand crafters can create the Condom Club. You mentioned Advil and Tylenol. No. But if Midol knew what they were doing, they could totally create a feminist community.
Yeah.
Right? That all of a sudden that brand stands for something more than a woman's pain. Tall order, but possible.
Yeah,
and people subvert categories all the time, right? Like Sir Kensington was all about subverting this category of ketchup as like a commodity to something, really interesting, and all of a sudden made you think, right? Made you think there's a better way. And one of my favorite brands du jour is Liquid Death.
Oh, man. Yes.
Who subverted water, but make it metal, right?
Yeah.
And my friends at Vacation, subverting sunscreen. Sunscreen is so boring now, and it's either like sport performance, or it's like fancy skincare product, and it's like, dude, like, let's make it fun. Like, let's make it 80s.
Yeah.
Let's make an air freshener.
Let's put it in a whoopee pad. Whoopee cushion. Whoopee cushion.
Put it in a whoopee cushion. Make a perfume out of it, I think these are the opportunities that oftentimes, like if you're so in the weeds, focused on like the growth marketing and CAC and customer acquisition, basically you market yourself into a corner, right? And we need to craft interesting brands if we're going to see them scale.
This might be a silly question, but as a marketer, are you always thinking about the emotional aspect of things, or is a lot of it just very statistical and kind of
1,000% emotional? 1,000%. You know.
So it is something that is being thought of, but maybe not in the same framing as you're describing necessarily.
Well, so
for an existing brand,
my company, N+1, you know, is my platform, and one of the things that N+1 stands for is language and mathematics on equal footing, coming together, right? It's about the magic and the logic. So I've seen like too many people like basically create like these art school brands, and they think the idea is everything, and they commercially go nowhere, but they were like cute things that belong in a museum. And I've also seen a ton of people who were like really, really smart with like MBAs and like private equity backing create something that doesn't have that magic that's going to spread virally, right? So it can't just be, I mean, I phrase it another way, I don't necessarily want to get involved in things that are just one or the other. I want to be involved in things where the magic and the logic comes together, and so emotional engagement, that's just what's interesting to me, and I think that also is just a crucial part of brand building.
I mean, what's so interesting to me about that is, I know that, so Joel and I both have our backgrounds in engineering. Joel used to be a white hat hacker.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so Amex hired him to basically hack. He has like an amazing backstory. I'm pretty sure he's a spy. And you know, it's what's been interesting though is, and I went to school for journalism and studied advertising, and so, but we're both engineers.
Yeah.
And so part of the challenge, even as entrepreneurs, is, you know, you kind of have to wear multiple hats. And so when we're thinking about how to build something, we are thinking sort of more very logically, and oftentimes we're thinking about how can we build, I don't want to say the MVP, but basically how can we create the value without necessarily having to do all the work so that we can try to, you know, hack it. Where things become more, and so for us, I think what you just described, this like how do you balance or pair the, we'll call it the like is it a good business from like a unit economics, and can you actually build a great business as of a great business model, and marrying that with the creative, like how are you distinct, like who is your tribe? You know, and that's a lot of what you and I have talked about, is just like what is that making sure that those two things are able to be combined, because so often, especially as engineers, we've built products that no one gives a shit about, right? And where magical things have happened sometimes is in building things that accidentally, inadvertently, someone really cared about, and you didn't realize it wasn't the thing that you thought that you were building. And so it's fascinating, and I think it's a lifelong challenge for most people who are building anything.
Well, some of what you're describing too is the things that we think are really innovative are not that interesting until you get some of the basic things in place to attract that customer with familiarity, and then show them the new way of thinking, right? I think that's part of where the technical challenge has been for us, where we can build it, but there's other steps that need to take place before they really understand the value and new direction of thinking.
Well, I know that we've kind of gone over, but Scott, before we get off, first off, I wanted to ask, is there anything else you wanted to add in and say before we sort of conclude this episode?
No, I don't have any last. Now you've drained me of all my gems of knowledge.
Drained you of all
last thing I would say is thank you for having me on. And for being a community resource.
Oh, hell yeah! And one question I wanted to ask, that we like to ask, is like if there was like one big ask, if there's like one thing that would be like change your life or change your business, if you had one big ask you could kind of put out into the world, what would that be? Like, so for anyone listening, or even for us, like if there's something that could help you, or you know, a friend or portfolio company or whatever, is there something that comes to mind?
I would say if you find companies that are bringing the magic and the logic together, send them my way.
Awesome. And where can people find you? Where's the best place to get in touch with you?
My thought leadership is live and uncut on Twitter at SWH Norton.
Awesome. And we'll put that into the show notes.
And my Instagram is extremely dormant and lame. So that's not. I'm not that cool.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Scott. It was great having a conversation with you.
Likewise.
And until next time, yeah.
All right. Yippee-ki-yay.
Yippee-ki-yay.
Bye-bye.